third and final day of the conference, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce once again our introducer. John Cady is a prize-winning poet and philosopher here at UWM, and he will be introducing our next guest.
Good morning. Glad you could all be here. It's a great pleasure to introduce Ariana Reines for her contribution to the Big No. All the more so since I've just discovered that we have all kinds of mutual friends, so it's a really a treat to finally meet her. She's a distinguished poet as well as a playwright, a translator, performance artist, and she's taught at Berkeley, Tufts, Columbia, the New School, and various other venues. She's published 4 books of poetry. The most recent one is called Mercury, which consists of 5 long interlocking sequences. The Mercury of the title is Quicksilver of Alchemy, and the poetry is really all about transformation and replacement. The replacement of the erotic by the scatological, poetry by the absence of words, beauty by the rejection of beauty. And her work couldn't fit more squarely into a conference devoted to negation, as in one of the poems in a sequence called 5.0, where repeated affirmations of truth and uniqueness are followed by an insistent no. Or in a poem called Glass, in the sequence called Leaves, where she describes the ambivalence and renunciation that are at the heart of her poetry. Just quote a passage from it. Writing beautifully made me feel like a fake, which is part of feeling like a person. I began to write in an ugly way, to subtract myself from womanhood and see only a person in bas relief with crucial parts and cartoon grief. Please welcome Ariana Reines.
Hi. Is this thing on? Oh, the lights are off. Okay. Thank you, John. Thank you all for being here. When I wrote Mercury, I hadn't yet begun to learn about astrology, but I can't, because of the confusions of today, I can't not begin with an astrological cliche, Mercury in retrograde. Some of you may have heard of it. You're laughing, so I guess that you have. Mercury astrologically rules, the planet Mercury rules language, rules all logistics, which is to say everything that happens on a road or that has to do with transportation or the movement of things, and likewise networks. And so when Mercury is in retrograde, there's this optical illusion that the planet Mercury appears to be moving backward from our point of view here on Earth. And when Mercury is moving backward, things, logistics go wrong. So the shuttle comes to the hotel, but it comes to the side of the hotel, and all of the presenters are waiting in the front of the hotel, or you schedule a conference and there's band tryouts happening next door. So this is all supposed to happen, and because I'm a Holocaust Jew, I always have to remember whenever I'm annoyed that the train is late or that the shuttle isn't coming, that actually I should be glad that the trains are not running on time, and that indeed everything is upside down and mixed up and like totally wrong. So yeah, I hadn't studied astrology when I wrote that book Mercury, but once I started to pursue a only mild interest in it, I learned that I was born with Mercury in retrograde. And if you're a poet or a writer, Mercury is probably always in retrograde for you, which is to say that language and its plasticity and the deformities and thefts that it involves you in, and your sensitivities to those deformities and those thefts, all of that is probably the story of your life. So you probably know all about Mercury in retrograde. So much for my stammering preamble. I'm about to do something that I don't know how to do, that I'm nervous to do, but I do feel blessed by all the logistical stuff. All of that frustration and sweat, I hope, will put us all in the right condition to go on a journey together. I want to thank Kenan for encouraging me to do something different. I have taken your encouragement at its word, and we will see how this all works out. And before I say anything else, I want to acknowledge the land we're on and the people who lived here before. And I'm going to mispronounce things, and I love when people mispronounce things, so I hope that whoever hears my mispronunciations can hear them with love as well. I learned that the word Milwaukee may have come from the Potawatomi language, and may also be Ojibwe, meaning something like gathering place by the water. And so I just wanted to read the names of the peoples who were living here, at least at the time of European contact. The Menominee, the Fox, the Mascoutin, the Sauk, the Potawatomi, the Ojibwe, and the Ho-Chunk peoples who were in this place, and whose spirits are still in this place, and whose descendants, of course, are still living all around us. Okay, does anybody recognize that symbol on the screen? Okay, so none of you have been to a pawn shop. Interesting. Great. Well, that's the universal symbol of pawning, the verb to pawn. And it became kind of the emblem for my theological research, insofar as I was able to think of it. What I'm going to be talking about today is kind of what I've been doing for the last 5 years that doesn't strictly count as poetry. It's a conversation that I want to have with you, and I know the lights are dim and it's early in the morning, but hopefully you'll feel emboldened to use your voice when and if the Spirit takes you. I just made something move that I didn't mean to move. Thank you, Mercury. Pawning. The symbol actually originates in Renaissance Italy. I guess where pawning first had its origin, and I think about the verb to pawn and also being a pawn as a kind of it's the emblem for me of the bad math that I'm living in or living through. At a pawn shop, you go and take your valuables and you sell them for shit money because you're in some kind of a desperate situation, and it's bad economics, bad math, bad exchange rate. But it is somehow. But at least there is some kind of exchange happening, some kind of a transaction that's a bad transaction, a transaction with a corrupt system, or a system that's stacked against you, or a system that doesn't recognize the kind of value that you're pursuing. And I became taken with this emblem also around the time that I started reading sacred texts, origin texts on the internet. There's something called sacredtexts.com. It's very exciting because you can read all of these texts of all kinds of religious traditions, many of which formerly you had to have some kind of credential to even grant you access sometimes to even see the book in question. But these were now translated and available to any kind of secular idiot, and I was really, really enjoying having these adventures through there. Ouvroir de théologie potentielle, that is a play on what some of the francophones and literati in the room will know as the Oulipo movement in the 60s. And just as I think of myself very much as a post-Holocaust writer, I think of the Oulipo and their pursuits with mathematics and with form as having something very much to do with the traumas of industry and industrial death. That's at least the way I think it and feel it. And so I thought, well, this will be the private flag of my shameful indoors theological pursuits, the games that I'm playing with potential theology. So I never made this flag or flew it, but I think it became kind of the flag of the stuff of the next little period of time that I'm going to be talking about with you. And that period of time is basically framed by Hurricane Sandy and the end of the Mayan calendar. These are two things that happened in 2012. So we saw that arresting image in Joshua Clover's talk yesterday of New York City in Hurricane Sandy. That's the perfect opening. If you think of that image from yesterday and your memory of it, that is where this period opens for me. So it begins with Hurricane Sandy, and it really, really gets going with December 21st, 2012, when the world was supposed to end, and perhaps it did. I don't know. And in any case, the Mayan calendar came to its end or its apogee and reset. Around this time, it was a little bit before Hurricane Sandy, I guess, I got an email. One of the things that I get a lot of, as you all do, of course, is email. But a weird thing for me, I guess, about existing in public as a poet is I sort of came of age with YouTube. So YouTube celebrated its 10th anniversary last year, 2016, and that was also the 10th year of my life in public as a poet. And one of the things I've gotten a lot of is I got really nice emails, and I also get slanderous troll kind of messages and communications, and those have been with me pretty much since the beginning. I had this one person who would write to me, and I called him a spammer because his emails had a spammy quality of involving hyperlinks and images, sort of like the spam of old, like the spam of the early 2000s, if you can remember, where it was a kind of sometimes stimulating to the imagination hodgepodge of words. A lot of flarf came out of this stuff. So he would send me these spammy emails, and he would spam me and Avital Ronell, the philosopher. He would write to us both. And I don't know why. I don't know if it was because we both have the same initials, or if we'd ever been in the same room together. I love Avital's work. I wrote a play based on a book of hers, and so she's a philosopher who means something to me. So this spam wasn't completely off base, but he would send these crazy and belabored, perseverating, quasi-philosophical spams to the two of us over a period of years. But I got one that really made me take notice, and it was about Rabbi Reines, who you see above. Rabbi Reines, and I found this very exciting, so I actually read the spam, and through this spam, through the gift of this spam, I learned that there had been a rabbi, Yaakov Reines, in Lida, Belarus. He lived from 1839 to 1915, and he was what we might call a progressive pedagogue. He ran a yeshiva in Lida, Belarus, that was either the first or one of the first yeshivas to teach secular subjects alongside religious subjects. So he was considered a total radical at the time. Of course, a lot of people were against him, but also there was great and fierce competition to gain entry into this yeshiva. A lot of people wanted to study in it. And he was also a Zionist, but not like a Theodor Herzl. He advocated a sort of different kind of, I suppose, no, I'm not going to say that yet, I'll say that later. He said, yes, we need some kind of a homeland where they won't pogrom us and won't destroy us, but we can't shed a single drop of Ishmaelite blood. That if we do that, it will be a scourge upon all humanity and upon Judeity for all time afterwards. We should buy the land. So he was kind of maybe, to take his word in a bad light for today, he was kind of like maybe a bad real estate developer. But I want to think of him as a good real estate developer. What thrilled me about this guy was like, oh gosh, there could be a patriarch in my family that I might be able to be somewhat proud of. I forgot to mention that the title of this talk is No Father, but I'm not even sure. I'm not sure I have the wherewithal to give that talk. I'm sort of making an allusion to Kafka and his letter to father. I don't know. The Twilight of the Gods. I shouldn't mention that. When I got this message, I thought, I'm going to write to my dad, and I'm going to ask if we're related to Rabbi Reines. And I really think that we resemble each other. My friend Giancarlo did this Photoshop for me, and I was so grateful for it. And I thought, yeah, definitely around the eyes. He made my nose just a little bit bigger, and I'm sure that as I age, like in 20 years, my nose will probably be that big. I thought, how wonderful that there could be maybe a progressive rabbi in my ancestry, and perhaps somebody who was trying to think of an idea of homeland or a Zionist idea that was not the genocidal apartheid nightmare that we all know. So I wrote to my dad, and I should add that my dad and I don't speak. I'm one of those poets who doesn't get along with their family, or whose family doesn't get along with them. But I was so hopeful. I thought maybe this could be the balm that would heal whatever had put us all at odds. And I said I learned from a spam about Rabbi Reines, and I'm very excited. I'm excited about his ideas, and I think that maybe we have something in common around the eyes, and maybe we're related. And my dad wrote me back and said that we weren't related. And so then I decided that I wasn't related to my dad, and that I would be related to this guy instead. So in 2012, one of the not directly poetic things that I did, with this energy from reading all of these forbidden sacred texts, forbidden to me because I didn't have the right blood or the right education or the right lineage, to read them, that the internet had given me free access to. And I was so stimulated by the idea of origins and the idea of beginnings in this time of apocalypse that I decided I would organize a kind of Sabbath. And it would be a different kind of way to read and write poetry. And that I figured it would happen on Friday nights, because that's when the Jewish Sabbath is, but it's also a really bad night to go out in New York City, because it's when all the tourists are out. So they're all just vomiting everywhere, and you can't really have a good time. And there was this Norman Mailer novel called Ancient Evenings, and I loved the title, and I had started reading it. And scatological is indeed a thing that I've been called, and of course John Cady mentioned it, sort of substituting the erotic with the scatological. Yes, I acknowledge that's a thing that I've done. This novel by Norman Mailer also involves a lot of sort of ancient Egyptian dildos and butt sex, and it's terrible, but it's terrible. It was unreadable. I thought, I'll like this book. This will be the Norman Mailer book that I can like. So I just took his name out and left my initials, and we had this poetry Sabbath, and the first one was in 2012, and it ended, the last Friday was December 21st, 2012, and it ended with a party, and there were all these poets and artists there reading and presenting their work, and it was this wonderful experience of thinking about poetry's connection to the origins of cultures, rather than writing being something that comes after experience. To think of poetry as posterior to or anterior to experience, rather than residual. And for me, this was a big deal because I've already mentioned the Holocaust and not getting along with my father, and being born with Mercury in retrograde, so expecting things to go wrong, and I'm not even allowed to want things to go right because it would be Nazi to want the train to arrive on time. But there's this line from a Paul Celan poem, and it's Michael Hamburger's translation of it, that even though a lot of my friends say they don't like this translation, this is the one that has guided my life. I've never been able to get out of my head this one imperative that comes from the poem Speak You Also by Celan. And he says, keep yes and no unsplit. Keep yes and no unsplit. And in the German, it kind of involves a pun with the vagina, and it's almost sort of like saying keep yes sheathed in the vagina from no, or I don't know. I'm not a reader of German, and I don't really have time to go into it, but we can perhaps discuss it later if you want to get into the niceties of feminism and being vulvarially oriented in your keeping of yes and no unsplit. But this has been my credo, poetically, and it's actually kind of become my ethics. To keep yes and no unsplit. And why am I telling you this right now? I don't remember. It'll come back. It'll come back, I promise. Okay. Ancient Evenings. Oh yeah. Okay. So we had to face the end with the beginning. So keeping yes and no unsplit. In this time of apocalypse, I decided that what we had to do was read texts from the morning of the world, so to speak. It's always morning in the world, said some poet that I can't remember right now, but I will remember by the end of the talk, and I'll tell you. Another thing that happened was this book came out, this translation, but we don't need to talk about it. I already told you about learning astrology, but I want to tell you about why, because this is a thing that happened in 2012 as well. My mom is paranoid schizophrenic, and one of the things that she began pursuing with great energy as her illness was setting in, she's trained as a medical doctor, but what she became really obsessed with as she was becoming schizophrenic was astrology. And of course, because I'm from Salem, Massachusetts, and because my mother's schizophrenic and she got interested in astrology as she was going crazy, the last thing I ever wanted to learn was astrology, because I am not interested in being crazy, and I'm not interested in being burned as a witch either, and it's bad enough being a poet, believe me. But at this time, in this apocalyptic era of 2012, I began to learn something about astrology. And I did it, it's too long a story for me to go into, but I will quickly glance on it. I'd been in a car accident in Haiti. And after that car accident, all of the people that I was with had wanted to get some information about the meaning of the car accident. And so they had wanted to go and see religious elders and to ask about whether the work that we were doing was the right work, and to ask humbly whether the car accident had some meaning. And one of the things that was involved in the answers that were being given and in the work that was being done by voodoo elders in Haiti was astrology. And I thought, hey, I didn't expect to find astrology in this context. And I thought, and it was beyond my thought, it was also given to me to think and told to me to think that learning something about this way of thinking and this realm of thinking and this world of thinking would not only be a healing gesture and a gesture of love toward the illness of my mother, but it would also provide an interesting way out of the academy. And so it's something that I began to practice, I should have given you a trigger warning for that. It's something that I began to practice professionally and para-professionally. So I have an astrology studio called Lazy Eye Haver, and I like to think about the bifocality of our eyes, and that in some way, perhaps while one of our eyes is trained on the manifest and the physical present, the other eye might be goggling up at the heavens. And I think in some ways, the eyes of the soul are always looking in both of these directions. I'm sorry I completely showed you that Courbet painting without warning you. that there would be a vagina in the next image, so now you've already seen it, so we can go to it. I've admitted that I'm interested in the origins of things, in particular the origin of the world. But the origin of the world, I don't mean to propose that as an empirical problem. It's more of it's a question that pursues me like a Zen koan or something. It's an impossible thing to think. And of course this painting has that wonderful title, The Origin of the World. And one of the things that I love about it is how awful it is. It's maybe Courbet's worst painting. And I like that the origin, while opening itself so pornographically to the viewer, is also nevertheless veiled by the pubic hair in it. And I was asked in 2012 to make a performance for a gallery in London that was showing early drawings by Tom of Finland. Is Tom of Finland somebody familiar to you guys? Yeah, I see a lot of nods. So of course, Tom of Finland, and those of you who know could probably explain it better than I'm about to for those who aren't familiar. Tom of Finland is an artist whose world is completely male. It's like it's an erotic wonderland of male sexual exuberance and extremely muscular, smiling, well-hung policemen and workers fucking each other, sometimes fucking each other on a trapeze, and all kinds of sexual phantasmagoria that do not involve any idea that a female could possibly exist. It's a world totally without women. So I thought it was so odd for the gallerist to ask me to make a performance for a Tom of Finland show, and so I decided I would impregnate the impregnable, which is to say I would insert the vagina into this space, and I used a 4th century Gnostic text called On the Origin of the World, and this one I hadn't read on sacredtexts.com. Although the same translation can be found there. It was the Nag Hammadi Library kind of paperback that came out in the 70s of a translation of a bunch of texts of heterogeneous value, you could say, and I mean value in a very unstable way. There's all kinds of different heterogeneities bedeviling the different texts that were in this one jar that was found in Egypt, in Nag Hammadi, in 1945, as World War II was ending. There was all kinds of stuff in this jar. There were kind of rough translations of Plato and sort of magical prescriptions and texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, and this one didactic text called The Origin of the World that retells the story of Genesis, or tells or retells in a way that is both familiar and unfamiliar to those who know the Judeo-Christian approach to the origin of the world. In this version, the angels all rape Eve out of jealousy and fear that that humankind will know its divine origin. Both Adam and Eve are able to conceive independently of one another. There's all kinds of things in it that aren't in the Bible. So I made this performance inside. I impregnated this impregnable space with an audio recording of the text, and it also involved a spider. I was trying to think through my fear of my own origins, and what stimulated me to think about that was I'd moved into this new apartment in 2012, and when you move, like when you move into a new place and it's all pristine, chances are the first time you see a cockroach, you're going to remember it. You know what I'm trying to say? And it's New York City, so you're going to see one. You're going to see one. And everything was so spare and pristine, and I was thinking about what I was going to do for this performance, and there was hardly anything in the apartment. It was just clean and empty, and this giant cockroach appeared, and I was scared, and I really didn't like that. It really bothered me. Like, why am I afraid of this thing? Is it because it's ugly? And how do I even know that it is ugly? I mean, why don't I like insects? Why am I arachnophobic? Is it because they're ugly? Is it because they're hairy? Do they remind me of the vagina? And is there something about the contingency of life, of my own life, of all life, that is just fundamentally terrifying and nauseating, that just can't be looked at? I don't know. So I decided that for this performance I would have to confront a tarantula. This tarantula, her name is Rosie. She's actually a professional tarantula. She's Chilean, but she lives in England. She has starred in Harry Potter and other films. She's worked with, she has a trainer who is a brilliant zoologist who specializes in poisonous and venomous creatures. And before the show started, one of the beauties of performance art is it doesn't have to be entertaining. In fact, it maybe should be boring. So when I met Rosie's trainer, he taught me that if she wasn't moving, that meant that she was happy. And thus, this performance became very, very slow moving. And I didn't know how spiders behaved. And in preparation for doing this, I had to imagine that I might be convulsing, because I was arachnophobic. But I wanted to confront my terror of spiders and my terror of insects, and thus to somehow bring myself into contact with my anxiety over the mystery of my origins and of all origins. But I had to prepare for the fact that I might be convulsing, that I might be screaming, I might be puking, I might be crying. But then to receive this information that in order for the tarantula to be happy, or in order to know that she was happy, I just had to know that I just had to have her be in a state where she didn't feel like she needed to move. Then I would be safe. Because another thing that I didn't know before I did this is that non-venomous, defanged tarantulas don't exist. So there's no such thing as a not poisonous tarantula. You just have to know how to handle them. So I had to stay very still. And during this time, it was a kind of a slow-moving. I like to think of it as story hour after lunch in kindergarten. It was early afternoon, so everyone was in that quasi-erotic, sleepy state of being digesting and being read a story to them. And my boyfriend at the time just decided to take all of his clothes off and join the performance, which was really obnoxious. But it's sort of part. It's part of the strange ethics of hospitality that doing durational performance enforces or necessitates. So one of the things that's interesting about performance, and it's not the same as poetry, of course, but it's a chance to maybe explore or digress upon some of the obsessions that one carries through one's poetry, is that you have certain entities that you're setting up to be in contact and communication with one another, that are also going to be in contact and communication with the public. And in order for it to be alive, and of course performance is supposed to be alive, it's not merely theater, it's not protected by a proscenium, nor is it protected, as I am now, by a lectern, but it's really, really open and ready. You have to think every possible intervention. And I had been thinking, I'll be convulsing, so I was researching the tarantella and thinking about that and all kinds of convulsive dance forms and dances that legend had it were actually evolved in order to purge the body of spider venom, as the tarantella was. But I had not thought that somebody would take their clothes off and try to join the performance. And being interrupted, as I've already sort of set up, being interrupted has to be sacred to me, just as the train not coming or the bus not coming has to be sacred to me, because it's these ruptures or when things go wrong that somehow one is thrown back upon one's own resources, however limited. This is a card from the Tarot de Marseille, which is one of the older tarot decks that we have. This is the filmmaker Alejandro Jodorowsky's edit of the Tarot de Marseille, and it happens to be the deck that I was taught the tarot on in Haiti. It was the one that was available to buy. And I've always loved this card. You saw the sort of two eyes digressing in the earlier, or diverging from one another. The two. I'm not about to quote Robert Frost, so that's not going to happen. But you know what I mean. So I have a passionate love for fraternity, which is to say for twinning that is not that in which the two parts of the twin situation are twinned in difference, united in their difference. So you see that one sibling has a tail and is on water, and the other twin, if it has a tail, it's not visible in any case. And the smiling twin seems to be offering a steadying hand to the one on the water, and is offering also an encouraging smile. And I love also that they're both receiving the sacred drops from the sun, and I love that the sun that is offering those drops is not smiling. I don't know how you guys drew the pictures that you drew as children, but I wrote, I guess. I don't know who taught me to draw this way. When I was a little girl, I used to draw a smiling sun at the top of the page, and I would indicate the sky by drawing a blue line at the top of the page. I don't know where I learned that the sun was supposed to be smiling. Excuse me. But I've always been very struck by, even arrested by, images in which the sun is frowning or is in some way melancholy. So in 2013, I began a series of collaborations inspired by this card. And the kind of fraternal collaboration I was interested in wasn't, although these collaborations were with men, it wasn't so much about collaborating with men per se as collaborating with masculinity, as it were. So I was collaborating with men who had a certain kind of machismo about them. Machismo is it's something that I struggle with in myself. I have a lot of weird machismo in me, and I don't know where it comes from. Some kind of, maybe it's because I'm short. I don't know. But the first of these collaborations was a little performance called Lorna, and it was with the great actor Jim Fletcher. Jim and I share a birthday, and so that makes us a kind of twin, I think, I hope, although we weren't born in the same year, and we look different from one another. And the performance was kind of about It was in an homage to the New York School's love for the No Theater and also for No Theater itself. So just to bring in Kenneth Koch again, who we were talking about this morning, it was a kind of a no play. And in No Theater, Japanese No Theater, one of the things that's really neat about it is the velocity that it works with. So the whole play can often be summed up in like a single line. It'll be like a traveler stops by a mountain refuge and talks to the proprietor for a while. And that's the whole play. But showing the play with the actors, all of the gestures and the movements move extremely slowly so that the drama of the material, or the real material, as it were, of the situation emerges through the duration of what in the description just sounds totally blah. And I really was excited by the prospect of this because of the way that it displaced the relationship between language and the body. So this was the first project that I did that where we both agreed in our collaboration to write the script only after we had figured out a bunch of movements together, so that the language would come somehow out of the body. And I shouldn't say the body, I should say our bodies, because saying the body is perhaps a totalitarian generalization that does us no good. I don't know what that is. Don't exit full screen. The next project that we did together was called Mortal Kombat, inspired by the 1993 video game. My little brother was really into this video game. Some of you may have played it. Did anybody in this room play it? Yeah. Okay, so great. That was like a good percentage, like more than half of the room has played Mortal Kombat. I remember Mortal Kombat because it came out around the time that I first started menstruating. And so I've always connected the splashing blood in Mortal Kombat. I should back up and say, for those of you who did not have the privilege to play the video game Mortal Kombat in its first and second and third incarnations, the thing that distinguished this game, there were other violent games at the time, fighting games like Street Fighter, which my brother says he liked better than Mortal Kombat. I don't know, can I see a show of hands for Street Fighter? Who preferred Street Fighter? Okay, yeah, and Mortal Kombat? Thank you. Thank you for the Mortal Kombat majority, although thank you also for your honesty with for the Street Fighter people. I think Street Fighter, you could do cooler moves. Mortal Kombat had some really crazy finishing moves, but what really struck me about Mortal Kombat was the like geysers of splashing blood. And it just always made me think like, oh, violent movies and bloody stuff and war, that's all just menstruation envy. So I decided that I would make this performance, since Jim and I had sort of opened up this practice together of being able to work in a very kind of rigorous way physically, and derive our language from that process, and that we were able to hold silence and also able to communicate with one another in a very, very careful way, that we would extend this into a project that was based on that game. And so Mortal Kombat was structured like a game in a series of rounds, and each round we would sort of perform our aggression against one another using different things. In this case, the medium of aggression is the face. So you can see Jim grinning at me, and I'm receiving his grin. You can also see that my stomach is red because in the previous round I had received blows to the stomach. So all of the violence in this project was real, and that's part of what we rehearsed, was sort of slapping each other in the face, punching each other in the stomach, and we were really trying to deconstruct, and I do mean in terms of deconstruction, the grammar of physical aggression. So figuring out how our bodies worked and moved when we were being aggressed and when we were the aggressor. And in order to do this work, we kind of had to elide the whole question of gender because it was just already there. We just had to work with the weight and the sizes and the shapes of our bodies. One of the biggest arguments that we had during rehearsal, just to give you an example, I'm going to have to step away from the lectern, but so one of the things that we were working on was okay, suppose one player goes over the midpoint, goes offside. Then the other player should push this player back into place. And Jim, being 2 feet taller than me, and you know, the guy that you see there, his way of pushing me back is he would walk up to me and his arm would bend and he would be looming over me, threatening me. And I, being the size that I am, if I were going to push a big man back, I would keep my arms straight, you know? Because it would not be in any way threatening to a big man if I bent my arm and basically walked into an embrace with him. That would be the last thing he would ever do. And we actually had a fight about this for like 2 hours. I was trying to explain why the push could not be done with a bent arm. So this is like literally what it means to deconstruct the grammar of aggression. And because aggression is unconscious, of course, it does have a grammar, and these things are automatic. And the other way that we did that was something that we started to call fenestration. Which is to say, it's in a way, it's a principle that I carried forward from what I was taught about how to handle the spider, which is that you have to move slowly. You have to remove momentum from the encounter. So for us to fenestrate our movements, it meant that we had to move in this manner that would not allow us to accelerate, would not allow momentum to take over and automatism thus to take over. And so each movement had to be fenestrated. There were just spaces of empty space between movements and gestures. What was I going to tell you about fenestration, this last thing? One of the things that I find so exhilarating and so weird about the practice of poetry is that the sort of people who do it, the sort of people who write poems, they tend to be kind of like intense. And there's a certain intensity one associates with poetry, right? It's lyric poetry, at least, is associated with brevity. And just surviving till the end of the line is kind of exhilarating and dreadful. Eileen Myles talks about reading a poem is sometimes like waiting to come. Like there's this weird anxiety involved in it where you both want it to be over already, and you're also really looking forward to the way it's all feeling and gonna be feeling. So it's this strange anxiety of wanting it to be over and not wanting it to be over. That's part of the peculiar force that breaks the line, and that creates the regime of meter, even meter as we know it now, without the metrical laws and rules. And there's something about the slowness of these confrontations that opened up like a caesura in my soul. It's not exactly a no, but it's some kind of opening. And while I was working on this piece, Mortal Kombat, while I was rehearsing it, a really crazy thing happened to me. And so now I'm going to take a pause, and this is going to be the kind of caesura of this talk. To get to it, I'm going to skip over a couple of things. There's something. There's going to be some images of Greek herms that involve. You will see penises. I'm sorry. Feel free to close your eyes now. I'm going to show that's some more Mortal Kombat. More Mortal Kombat. Here's the penises. We'll come back to them later. While I was working on Mortal Kombat for the Whitney, I had a job teaching, and there was a person who was sexually harassing his colleagues and his students there, and there was a Title IX suit that came out of it. So I was commuting to this job where there was a colleague who was putting some of my students in distress, and I was struggling with the question of whether or not I should teach at this place. And I was coming back to New York to have these very physical rehearsals involving learning how to be punched in the stomach and learning how to be slapped in the face. Because I'm somebody who had no martial arts training, I don't know, anybody in here do martial arts? Great. I wish that more of us did it. I wish that I had learned how to receive blows, or to put it in another way, to receive energy and to deflect it. I think that is a really, really, really important thing to learn when you're facing all kinds of aggressors, which we all are in our day, not only physically, but of course in the ethers. And I would come out of these rehearsals and I'd be in this crazy state of exhaustion. Getting punched in the stomach is really tiring. Even when the person punching you is somebody really nice, and even when you said it was okay. And I was walking along, and I had an experience that's basically, we'll call it a visitation. A kind of, or you might call it a kind of possession. The sun started to come through what I call my antenna, which is the part of my head where my white hairs sprout, and it's also the part of my head that I banged when I was in a car accident, in that car accident I told you about in Haiti. So I think of this as my antenna, and the sun started beaming into it, and I suddenly found myself in this state of total bliss. And the sun began talking, and I started to write down what the sun was saying. And what I'm going to do now for the last 10 minutes of the talk is I'm going to read you what the sun said. But I just want to preface this with a little bit more hemming and hawing before I get into that part, by saying that poets talking to the sun is nothing new. Or poets being talked to by the sun. Mayakovsky was talked to by the sun. Of course, Frank O'Hara was talked to by the sun. And hearing voices and having visions, that's no big deal for poetry. So I'm not trying to frame this with any kind of specialness. One of the things that made me laugh at the time, so I'm sitting there on this bench in New York City, and even, I've had some visions before. Like I had one once with the sun. But I was in New Mexico in this beautiful place, and I didn't think that you could be talked to by the sun in New York City. And even Frank O'Hara had to be on Fire Island for the sun to talk to him. And the sun explains that it's just too crowded. You have to slide down all those buildings in New York City. So I was not expecting to have this colloquy on a bench on Allen Street with traffic going in both directions on both sides of me. And one of the things that I laughed about as it was happening, and the way I always know if something's really happening is if I have to laugh, is at the time, because I was so wretchedly stressed out by the question of whether and how I might pursue accepting working at an institution where the colleague who was actually kind of my boss was a predator to other colleagues and to students, and even was creepy and gross to me. And I was doing this physical performance that was trying to somehow deal with the agon and the angst of gender inside of us, and also exoterically. I had a beard. I had a mosaic beard. That's Michelangelo's Moses, but I'll skip to the more familiar Charlton Heston. I had a mosaic beard. I had a beard at the time, but it was a zit beard. There was a beard made of acne. And when the sun was talking to me, I was like, oh, great. You're talking to me because I have a mosaic beard. I must be where you want me. And I hadn't even thought about the fact that there had been that Rabbi Reines thing, and I had thought, oh, great, an ancestry, a lineage that I could sign up for. So I'm sitting there in hilarity and absurdity with my green notebook out, writing down the things that the sun said, ruing and also giving thanks for my hideous mosaic beard. And now what I'm going to read you is what the sun said. And I want to just say that this isn't a poem. It's just a transcription. So, mosaic. Reality is perceptible. Situations are cells. People don't know how to use their talents. Analogy is the structuring principle of the world. Each people has the gift of its catastrophe. Learn how to use this gift or meet your peril. The suffering of woman is the true story of the universe. We have to understand ourselves at all costs. Nature extends from us. Nature mirrors us. Earth is special. People from all over the universe will come here. There is no back to get to. God didn't die. He's just not the only God in the universe. The moon is superior to the sun insofar as she has had the night to know he is not the only God in the universe. Difference is meant to be comedy. Difference is a toy. Nazism was an invitation to the world to reckon with the nature of evil. Each thing teaches. What you're supposed to do when faced with evil is learn its secret. What urgent disease, deficiency within my own soul does this wretched symptom signify? We do need every kind of story because there is every kind of person, yet still great art is crucial for the world to watch when it watches divinity in splendor, rather than what we're watching now while learning to watch. Mercury also teaches I want to be like, and the risks that go with I want to be like, to teach us about the principle of likeness that governs the universe. Our solar system, analogous to the universe. Mercury favors women and children who long to become, who learn by imitation, who listen. The world always sustains the maximum suffering it can bear, according to the nature of its age. There will always be the maximum possible destruction in a given time. This is why the other world has always needed to be created, knowing that the world will always sustain the maximum of destruction. Technology is for communication. Technology evolved solely for the purpose of divine communication. All its other forms are byproducts. The reason great art matters is see as I see. The time of spectacle will pass. Everyone has a star. This is why we practice dialogue. We're learning. The deeper into the cell you get, the more kinds of people you produce. The more you learn about the cell, the more you have to know about the people. Divine scientist, medicine would be divine. There is nothing a person cannot love. Everything has a nature. Find out yours. End of transcription. End of talk also. So we can turn the lights back on, and I guess we have, I think, 15 minutes to talk a little bit. Yeah?
Half an hour.
Oh, half an hour, great. I was galloping along, and so maybe since we have a half hour, I can just try to explain a little bit how these things came through and what the language is. So I explained that it's a transcription. I didn't write it. It was really, really weird because some of the things in here I understand. Some of them I think I understand. And some of them I remember perfectly, which is to say I remember the thought form in its total contour as it arrived into me. The language that I wrote down in my notebook and the language that you've seen on the screen, it was as though, you take a three-dimensional object, right? The language was like one side of a thought form that had fullness, shape, contour, and all of its implications kind of built into it. So in some ways, this transcription is also residual. In that the language is the intelligible or somewhat intelligible residue of these thought forms as they possessed me. Does that make sense? And I also want to say that this had never, ever, ever happened to me before. Some funky stuff has happened to me. Some funky things have happened to me since then, but this itself has never happened to me. Had never happened to me before, and so far it has not happened again. I couldn't even look at the transcription until a few weeks before a conference on occult poetics in Montreal, at which I had promised myself that I would finally come out of the closet with this particular piece of my experience. So I don't know if that helps to. If that helps, there are ways that some of these statements I find some of them irritating. And you may as well. And I just wanted to articulate that they were part of these thought forms that were larger. Yeah. Yes.
So I know that you talked about Mercury in retrograde, and that's kind of an organizing frame, that would be right. But I want to raise the question of whether you aren't actually working with Gemini, because so much of what you present magistically is really about the twins, and you mentioned twinning. So are you working with that in any depth?
Absolutely. Yeah, am I cutting you off?
No, that's
okay,
fine.
Yeah, totally. Well, okay, the first thing that I loved is that actor Jim Fletcher, who I told you has the same birthday as I do. Whenever I talk about the things that I do with Jim, I have to say Jim and I. Jim and I. So yeah, and of course Mercury is the ruling planet of Gemini. So absolutely, I didn't know when I was writing that book Mercury, which was a long time ago, that I would find myself working in this way and working with twins and twinning. So with such devout and humble faithfulness, I guess. But yeah, sure, I'm totally working with that. And all of us who toil in language are. Yeah.
You had one line that jumped out at me, a million lines that jumped out at me, but one was that performance should be boring. But that was right in the middle of having a tarantula on you and getting hit in the stomach. And nothing about any of this seemed boring. You spoke a lot about duration, and I don't know how much you want to go into kind of theories of time and everything, but I was just struck by that line, that performance should be boring. Is there a role for boredom in your work, or why did you introduce that concept?
Well, so I try to bring boredom in. Thank you. Yeah, sure. So when I talk about these things, it's happening quickly. And of course, getting punched in the stomach and confronting a tarantula, all of that stuff induces panic. And that's precisely what I'm trying to go into. I was trying to enter a confrontation non-confrontationally, if you will. And there was a little trouble of like, oh, this is going to be so cliche, like witch from Salem gets naked and has a tarantula. Like, it just sounds awful. It sounds like the last kind of art I would ever want to go and see. But the duration produces a kind of trance. And I always loved the period of time in kindergarten, which I also referred to. We would have a story read to us after lunch, and then we would take a nap. And I don't know how kindergarten was for you guys, but for us, when we were all napping, they put us in a room and closed the door, and everybody would masturbate. And so there was always this like weird combination of like the food, being read to, being sleepy, going to sleep, and everyone kind of masturbating. It was very nice. Nobody was doing anything to anybody else. Nobody was taking anything away from anybody else. It was this very peaceful, quiet, kind of mysterious space of the early afternoon. So even though the sun was up, a kind of a dream time. And with The Origin of the World, that performance with the tarantula, the text takes about an hour to read. And by the time the performance sort of had to grow larger in order to phagocytose the person in the audience who had elected himself to become now a performer as well, it funnily happened at a perfect moment around the time that the text was talking about Adam and Eve. So by then everyone was sort of in some kind of a trance. And there were times that I closed my eyes. There were elements involved in that confrontation that were really more about going to sleep and being read to and going into a kind of a dream space. And it's not exactly boredom, but there's something close to it. If you've ever been hypnotized or entranced or found yourself maybe on the BART. I find myself often hypnotized on the BART train. Those of you who have been on that train, that when it goes under water, I find that I can't not fall into a trance for at least a moment. And I sometimes ask myself, well, this time you're not going to get in trance, but I will inevitably find myself having lost consciousness somehow, or slipped into a different state. And with Mortal Kombat, the boredom that we tried to introduce into the whole framework of the project was through that fenestration. And without the fenestration and without the boredom, which creates anticipation and also irritation, we couldn't work rigorously with the material itself. And of course, when you call a performance Mortal Kombat, and you host it at the Whitney Museum at midnight, and there's a drummer from Psychic TV playing, and there's free beer, people want to see blood. They want blood. And actually, at the end of the performance, I was very blessed to get my period that day, and I did pull out my tampon at the end, and that was the only blood in the performance. And people were disappointed. They were angry. They were really angry that we didn't die. It was called Mortal Kombat, so we should have died. And they were angry that there hadn't been enough blood. And so introducing boredom, or an invitation to boredom, slowing things down, is a form of resistance. It opens a caesura, and it forces a different kind of encounter. Theater is not allowed to be boring, and academic conferences are supposed to be boring, but there's other modes of performance that really, really aren't allowed to be, and one finds oneself wanting to entertain, wanting to please, so actually needing to work with this as a material, I find it, I find it crucial. And I maybe over-answered your question or totally failed to answer it. Great. Yes.
I was thinking, something that popped up in my head listening to your different performances and experiences. It seems that it seems like you're almost hospitable toward otherness or to the things that disturb you. And I wonder if, in some ways, I see that in tension with the whole idea of reputation, right? Because reputation is about, talk to the hand, right? Leave a message after the beep, right? In some ways. So is there a reputation in what you're doing?
I'm thrilled that you said the word reputation, because when I was taking a shower this morning, I was thinking about reputation, and it's like reputation by hospitality. Like I said the word phagocytosis, it's like when one of those single-celled organisms, in order to eat another one, it just gets bigger and just enfolds it. So it's a vaginal or a vulvar mode of reputation. And I have no choice but to be hospitable to all this shit that's pouring through me all the time. We're all in the same shit, right? And it's in the air. It's in the air. The air is made of money. It's made of pornography. It's made of other people's sex and other people's money and the money that they're making off of us here. So we're all in it. It's passing through us anyway. And I glossed over it very quickly, but so when I translated The Young Girl, the preliminary materials for a theory of the young girl, that came out in 2012. But by then, after doing that translation, I was like, can't read any more theory, can't read any more philosophy, I'm not allowed to anymore. So this period of time that I've been talking with you guys about was also a period of time that I accepted that I would say no to modes of discourse that involve reputation, etc., etc., etc. But I do remember Levinas and hospitality, and somehow it is absolutely an organizing principle of my nomad existence. And in some way, I find that it has to be, it is necessarily an act of reciprocity and a reciprocal act. So one is never merely receiving hospitality, one is also always offering it. Sorry. I am refuting. It is perhaps that I have the privilege now to refute in a different mode and in a different manner. I don't have to put on the drag of a man, although I am kind of in man drag today. But I don't have to wear the drag of a refuter in order to denature or to queer or to defang, declaw, what's the word? Diffuse the poisonous part of whatever the transmission is. I've learned that fenestration and a certain kind of slowness are really, really helpful medicines in this pursuit. And I hope to arrive at what will have been a refutation without having to actually refute. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. I hope that in the long term it will have amounted to a refutation. This pursuit of living and working in this way. Saying no to my dad. Who was born in Milwaukee, by the way. I see faces that aren't yet lifting their hands, but they look somewhat like they might want to lift their hand. Yeah?
Thinking about the planets and retrograde motion of Mercury and the fun interpreting what that means. And the notion of wandering by choice also is a chaos, but it's against the grain. It's a reputation of the Greek theology or mythology, how the planets go for a week against the spirit, the orb, everything else.
Yeah.
But we get it by choice. The assertion of will, maybe creating chaos from the outside is good. I don't know that I have a question so much as I've been thinking about the different ways to interpret what retrograde Mercury for 3 days means. There's choice involved too.
Oh yes, he likes to dance backwards and play the fool. Did I cut you off? I'm sorry.
No.
Yes.
You had mentioned keeping yes and no unsplit.
Mm-hmm.
Expand upon that.
Would you all like to hear the poem?
Sure.
Okay, hang on a second, it's on my phone.
Everything's on our phone.
Okay. And this is Michael Hamburger's translation. Speak, you also. Speak as the last. Have your say. Speak. But keep yes and no unsplit. And give your say this meaning. Give it the shade. Give it shade enough. Give it as much as you know has been dealt out between midnight and midday and midnight. Look around. Look how it all leaps alive. Where death is, alive. He speaks truly who speaks the shade. But now shrinks the place where you stand. Where now, stripped by shade, where will you go? Upward. Grope your way up. Thinner you grow, less knowable, finer, finer. A thread by which it wants to be lowered, the star. To float farther down, down below, where it sees itself gleam in the swell of wandering words. So to keep yes and no unsplit. First of all, I never know if a poem is good until I notice that I still can't stop thinking about a piece of it years later. And then I realize it's good. And I don't, there's all kinds of things I want to like, want to appreciate, but it's the ones that stay in my body and that insist on wandering with me, or that I find myself following without really understanding why, those become like the signal poems of my life. So keep yes and no unsplit, this imperative. Well, in Paul Celan's poetry, the you is very often the speaker. And it is often like a very hectoring, imperative, and demanding voice that is speaking to the you of his poems. But of course, we cannot be addressed by those imperatives when we read Celan. Since I'm not giving a lecture on Celan, I won't give background on who he was or what he survived, or the landscapes that fill his poems. I'm sure that many of you know, and if you don't, you can discover all of these things from much greater minds than mine. But to keep yes and no unsplit, to affirm and negate, to also accept the shade, and to speak the shade, to speak the shadow, the negation, the fact that life springs up inside of death, right? April is the cruelest month, all of that about the corpses pushing up flowers in the wasteland. There is something about this violence that is also at the roots of poetry. And so to connect Keep Yes and No Unsplit to the astrological work, this time, April, is the martial season. It's the time of Mars, it's the time of war. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales begin with the April sun and the ram, right? We are in the time of the ram, we are in the time of Mars, it's the time of bloodshed and death. And why does poetry spring up in this violence? In the midst of this, I don't know. And of course, one wants to speak of beautiful things, like flowers and love and whatever, and one wants to pursue the good, like communism and the end of all of our troubles, the end of prison, the end of everything. I want to speak of good things, but in order to speak poetry, I have to keep yes and no unsplit. I have to speak the shade as well. So there's the flowers that grow out of the corpses, but then there's the corpses themselves. And I don't know if this is too kindergarten as an expansion on that, in answer to your question, but that's basically it. That to be in the swell of wandering words, you have to speak the shade also. You have to keep it. You have to keep the no, a phagocytosis here. Let the no eat the yes. Yeah.
I don't know how familiar you are with German language, but there's actually a colloquial word now that has done exactly what Ceylon suggests, Yin.
Wow.
It's sort of what you say when kind of yes, kind of no, but it went from being slang to being almost universally used now.
From nine to yin.
It's Yin is what it is.
Yin?
Yeah, so it's literally
Yin.
yes and no, J-E-I-N.
Love it. Thank you. Yes.
Throughout your talk, you seem to be constantly displacing whatever was the most canonical and iteration of some concept or some area of artistic or intellectual production, and kind of displacing that with something that's thought of as being more banal or more cliche or something. So from Street Fighter, it's usually the more acclaimed video game, to Mortal Kombat, or even from like Theodore Herzl to this some more obscure rabbi, this kind of more obscure Norman Mailer novel. There was another example I had. I was just wondering if there was some kind of if that was, even just emphasizing boredom as opposed to certain kinds of novelty or whatnot. I was just wondering if there was some kind of general kind of critique of the idea of a canon or certain kinds of critical criteria that are often used to evaluate different kinds of artistic or intellectual or political production that we usually focus on in constructing different kinds of canons or alternative canons or reading lists or great works or what have you. That's kind of oriented a lot of your thinking in your work.
Yeah, of course. I mean, my formation, even when I was studying philosophy and literature, the people who were training me and were forming me were of course militating against the canon as it had been constituted and against all of these things. And of course, I would also say it's just my feminism, but to say it a third way in a really simple way, it's just metabolic. Like these are the things to which I am attracted. So I'm attracted to what's in the shade. What I love about poetry is nobody cares about it. You can just go through the trash. And I love going through the trash and seeing what's there. And there's nobody looking over your shoulder when you're rooting through the trash. Everybody's all looking somewhere else, you know? And so you can really, there's actually a lot in there. And you can find it like a raccoon and wash it and then use it. That's where I work. I work in the charnel ground, in the shade, in the garbage, and it's, you know, I would be lying if I said nobody told me to do it. No, I had some good pedagogues who were praising that kind of thing in academic terms, in critical terms, in theoretical terms. But for me, like, just to take it one step further, so I'm acknowledging and answering yes, but it's also that. I think we're at a point where we can't just say that we want to do these things in the same form that these things come out in. All right, that was a totally inarticulate statement. Thank you, Mercury. I mean that we have to change the arena in which this work is done. And in which these exchanges are transacted. And that's what Ancient Evenings was about. I was tired of doing poetry as work. I was tired of doing it in university classrooms. I wanted to do it as a banquet, as a celebration, and as a Sabbath. And that's, of course, how it has always been done, right? So instead of changing the things that we read, because in some ways, there's all, you know, I want to read everything. I want to read the canon, I want to read everything else, and I want to read the candy wrappers and the gum wrappers. I want to read everything, but perhaps more than worrying about what's in the canon, and now we have this other canon that's the anti-canon, but we're still doing it the same way. Like, I think we should gather in different ways, you know? I would encourage everyone, not that I have the right to encourage, but all the same, I would encourage everyone to do your thinking and your reading in groups that are physical in different ways. Just do them in different ways and see what that yields for you, because it's the format through which we perform for one another, and through which we're able to touch the things that matter to us, and to offer to one another the things that matter, to do our reading for one another. Sometimes the form itself sucks all the energy away from the work that we're doing somehow, and it's mysterious why that is, you know? So I over-answered again. Thank you. Yes?
Oh, sorry.
I didn't know who I was pointing at. So we'll come to you guys next. Yeah, go ahead.
To use a carnal analogy, another. If one has prostate cancer, there's a lot of consultation that tell you to take an aggressive and relatively quick reaction to it. There's some that say, well, you're not apt to die of it anyway unless it's, a certain grade. And then there are the suggestions that one assume the attitude of watchful waiting. And it struck me when I was thinking about resistance. We've seen it explode. We see it sometimes explode in riot, like after a decade of maltreatment in Los Angeles. All of a sudden, Los Angeles in 1992 went up for grabs, and nothing had been happening before. But you put things in terms of martial arts, duration, not to allow it to become an automaton, but sort of like watchful waiting. Absorb the energy for a while as if to figure out really how to respond. And that's why you said you don't consider it as a no, I presume, but an opening.
Yeah.
Watching for the opening and not immediately exploding to the situation. Is that your notion of resistance?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was really interested in, actually, while I was working on Mortal Kombat and going back and forth to this job where there was a creep who was preying on people and feeling very triggered and having all of my violences and rebellions incited and feeling like I was in an emergency, I became really interested in Sikh masculinity. I was just really, really interested in how various peoples in different places and times stay themselves, don't assimilate, the things that they do to keep themselves themselves constituted in their identities, and also the ways that they prepare, the ways that they sort of incorporate a martial training and preparation to meet an enemy. But there's also a kind of inward-looking, self-constituting structure that allows the identity of a people and of a group not to be dissolved by rage, by their own rage, or by the vicious incursions being made on them by malevolent regimes. So that was one of the things that I was thinking a lot about. And watchful waiting. Totally. Yeah. You.
Okay. Is there a distinction between the performance of boredom, like acting slowly moving, and unsolicited boredom? Does it operate under like regimes of ordinariness? Is it oriented differently in space and time?
When you say unsolicited boredom, do you mean
when you're binge watching Netflix,
right?
Being bored.
So do you consider that solicited or unsolicited boredom? Meaning that, okay, I'm trying to understand you. So meaning that you're binge watching Netflix, wanting to be entertained, yes. But what you're being is being bored.
Boredom has overcome you, like an overwhelming sensation.
Yeah.
As opposed to acting boredom.
Okay. So what it feels like to be bored as opposed to what it feels like to perform working with boredom as a material.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Of course, our entertainments bore us, and we all have that experience. And I think we sometimes also binge watch in order to exhaust ourselves and to somehow turn ourselves over to some kind of trance, and that's a very readily available kind. But it's not a trance that we have to enjoy in order to binge on it. So I just want to sort of say that back to you in my words. Working with boredom, and boredom is, it's really, let's keep the word fenestration. So the window is open for air and space to flow through. And the sum total of it may be boring. But we, the actors, are in a state of watchful expectancy. It's a state of intense hospitality to whatever may come. And what's really cool about silence is you can extend and extend that expectancy, and it actually creates suspense. So it actually becomes exciting because, and I can't speak to what the audience felt watching us, but we are in a state of absolute, almost rapturous alarm, because when you are not working with momentum and you're not allowing the kind of automatic grammar of the way that you're familiar with your own body and what it's going to do, you don't have to question it because it's just your body that you lived in all your life and it moves through space the way it moves through space. No, all of this is in question in this space, and so not only are we not moving quickly, but we're in a state where our consciousness, with its tentacles kind of all stretched out and in the state of readiness and alarm, because we know we will come to blows, and we know that things will happen, but there are going to be an extension of this kind of slow-moving, fenestrated kind of moving. There's also, we start to feel the consciousnesses of everyone else in the room. And so it is difficult to describe, but it is nothing like watching Netflix. Nothing at all. It's extremely strange and exciting. I hope that you will get the chance to do it.
Well, please join me in thanking Ariana.